Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Katsaruba, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is an organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees and give a special thanks to Allison Lynch and the entire Quokka team for making today's event possible. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists with a Q&A discussion. And if you have questions of your own and you'd like to engage with our panelists, feel free to submit them into the Q&A section of this platform. We're also going to be posting polls, so be sure to respond to those poll questions as the audience in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credit for attending today's event. So with that all said, I would love to bring our panelists on camera if you're not already. Looks like most of you are, and off mute because we're going to begin with a round of quick introductions. So please share with our audience who you are, what your role is, what you do, and what agency or organization you're with. So if we could begin, Rudolph, if you don't mind getting started for us, please, and then we'll go around.
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So I'm Rudolph Rojas. I'm with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I work as an information and security technology manager and work on a team that supports several of the agencies within USDA here in Washington, D.C. And I act as kind of a liaison between the technology teams that are doing development, application development, website development, and we provide infrastructure and security management for these applications at our hosting centers in public cloud and in the disk centers out in Kansas City, Missouri.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to Steve next.
Sorry, I thought I was a little later in the program, so I didn't have the mute off. But I'm Steve Pitcher. I'm in the process of retiring. I've got that deferred retirement program, so I'm unofficially here as the senior cyber survivability analyst for the department. I've been doing it since 2017. Our focus has been on weapon systems, but it's also directly applicable to operational technology and components of the enterprise. So my focus is going to be on how can we better define our performance expectations for cybersecurity and cyber resilience, so that when we go out to apply technologies to engineer solution sets for our commanders or CEOs or COOs and CFOs to choose from, we are showing them how the technologies we are applying actually fit the performance expectations that they have laid out. And that's a much different way of looking at it than we have in the past. We have rushed to solutions as technologists and bring that technology and that solution set to our seniors without an understanding of just how much cybersecurity and cyber resilience they expect, without looking to how much resources and technology availability is there. So that's my take on it. That's my perspective that I'll be sharing today.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, let's go to George next.
Good afternoon. My name is George Nickel. I'm the Deputy Program Director for the NASA SUIT Government-Wide Acquisition Contract Vehicle. So it's a program that allows the entire federal government to purchase their IT solutions. So I've served as a deputy program there, making sure our contract holders and industry know how to leverage the contract, as well as helping the government user understand how to issue their solicitations and their requirements, cybersecurity requirements sometimes, through the SUIT contracts.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's go to Landon next.
And I'm Landon Shaw. I work for the Administrative Office of the United States Courts in Washington, D.C. I'm the hostmaster, postmaster. I take care of DNS and email. the SMTP gateways, and our cloud-facing content delivery network from Akamai. And I'm on a team of architects that does modernization efforts with judiciary.
Great, thank you. All right, and then Mark.
Mark Wasson, as the Marine Corps is always doing more with less, I'm double or triple billeted. I oversee pretty much everything Android and iOS in the Marine Corps, which is about 20% of our end user devices. My primary function is strategy and planning, and then I also have to double hat as the cybersecurity guru for now, till we get our staffing problems addressed. So jack of all trades, master of none.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, and Chris.
Hey everyone, Chris Gogol here at Quokka, supporting our federal government agencies, both on the defense and civilian side, deploying and securing mobile applications and mobile devices in their organizations. So long history here at Quokka, doing this work for the last 10 years. So lots of experience in actual deployments of some security tooling for mobile threats and emerging threats as well on that side. So looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're gonna get started with our first discussion question. For the panelists that I didn't meet with on a prep call, just use the raise hand icon to flag me down, let me know that you want to jump in and share your perspective. We're gonna spend about 10 or so minutes on each question. But Landon, if you don't mind starting off with the first question, I wanted to ask, what are some of the most common and overlooked security risks that are associated with mobile apps, especially in the context of shadow IT? So if you could give me one or two examples, and then we'll hear from the other panelists.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that's often overlooked is that people attempt to try to make an app and actually make an app for both platforms. Typically, they do it for Apple and Android phones, when they may not actually need to make an app. They'll spend a lot of time on development of an application, and since the software development kits, the SDKs for these apps change very quickly, because the feature sets that are associated with new hardware that goes into mobile devices. These apps can take advantage of those, the new hardware, like whether it's a GPS or some type of sensor that's in the device. But a lot of times people don't need to actually develop the app, and they could create a light app, which actually redirects the person to a public-facing website. So unless sensor information is needed or information from the cell phone is needed other than a location of a person, which can be derived by other means, right? I think that a lot of people do is they spend a lot of time and money developing an app that constantly have to update, when really they could create what to the user would appear to be an app, but when you click it, it actually just opens up a mobile device website that's been optimized for mobile devices. That seems to be a better approach for 99% of the users of organizations, because they can keep their costs down by having a single development team just manage their normal website, and have developers just create a website that's optimized for mobile devices instead of trying to maintain separate app infrastructures. That's one thing that I've noticed. The other thing is, a lot of times people try to use applications for things that would be better suited to not use an app. An example would be, they'll develop an app when what they should really do is use something like, in the mobile marketplace, there's a product called Hypori. I'm not recommending a specific product, but what I'm saying is Hypori is a virtual tablet or a virtual cell phone. So what this will let you do is you download the app on your phone, you launch it, and it's like launching a virtual machine. You're launching a virtual machine that looks like a cell phone or a tablet. And this allows people to be able to use their phone, have the same interface you're used to having, but they're actually doing it in a secure way because there's no transfer of data back and forth. So when data concerns are an issue where you don't want data to stay resident on a mobile device, using an app like Hypori would allow you to, which is like a zero trust designed application, would allow your users to access data without having any data stored on the local machine. So I guess what I'm saying is I think people should think different before they go down a path of trying to develop an application. They may find that it may be easier to develop a lightweight app, which is actually just a what used to be called a WAP enabled website, like a wireless device website, or utilize something like Hypori instead of developing or trying to develop some hardened application. It might Hypori gives you the interface of looking at your phone, but click on things, you're actually into a special segment.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Landon. Chris, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So I wanted to add a couple things. I'll follow Landon's example and just talk about two things that we see as potentially being overlooked. So I'll take it from a different perspective, maybe not as a developer of an application, but users of apps. You know, it's a state of play today in the world where we are using mobile devices for just about everything. I think I heard, last year at a different ATARC event, over half of all federal work is being done on mobile devices in terms of communications over the network. And with that comes applications. On the devices, we see a lot of different areas where applications are potentially being overlooked as a threat vector. So one of which is you mentioned shadow IT in the question. That is a big area that we see, and we saw a recent example of this in the DoD with some recent news about the telemessage app, which was a variant of Signal with some wraparounds and essentially a shadow IT version that added some extra features. And of course, without proper vetting of technologies like that, apps like that are getting access to sensitive data, there comes a risk of that data being leaked or harmed in a way that's not using the officially vetted version, officially developed version of that app. And we see that across not only communications, secure communications, but usage of other platforms. You might have a scanning application because your Microsoft app isn't allowing you to scan something in, so you download something to scan it in. All these different applications can add a different threat vector to the device, whether or not something like Hypori is on the device. Because the reason it's shadow IT, it's because it's unapproved IT. It's not going through the official process. It's going around the official process. And I think there's a lack of focus potentially on those other applications that are on that device. You might have a virtual machine on your desktop or your mobile phone, but if you have 10 other applications sitting right next to that virtual machine in your app drawer that are stealing contact data, location data, or unintentionally leaking data, well, you can have the most secure virtual machine in the world, but your device is still insecure, and you're bringing that device into secure places, secure networks. So I think it's important to focus on not only, potentially say, let's managed apps, work applications, officially approved apps. Of course, those are important to address, but everything else that's sitting on the device next to those applications are also extremely important, because in the end of the day, it's one device. You have one screen that you're looking at, and those applications are sitting on that device in your pocket, coming into the room with you, coming home with you. And we've seen in the world, the second piece here is, the tracking that's able to be done through those applications, whether or not you're aware of it. I've seen examples, where you can actually draw Google Maps around any building in the world, in the US, and say which devices have come in and out. And then it might not give you the name and the exact location or details of that user, but I could draw, let's say, a square around my office and a square around my house. And then I can say which devices have also been in both of those locations. So I can start tracking people through the applications, through the advertisement libraries in those applications, analytics libraries, things that are collecting data every day about users, unbeknownst to many of the users out there. So it's equally important to both vet the managed apps, potential shadow IT apps alongside those, but also the other applications that make up your device. So you have confidence that the device is itself as a whole is secure, not only the managed or work applications.
Thank you, Chris. George, go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what Chris said there, specifically around the data, I think the biggest piece there, it's not so much that it's an overlooked risk, but I think the amount of data some of these apps have access to is a big issue. And I think one of the things just to add a little bit here, one of the things, NASA is very cognizant of is making sure we separate corporate data or, agency specific data from personal data, and making sure that it's clear, those two don't mix, and developing cybersecurity principles around those. So those are kind of some of the things to kind of pay attention to, the risks associated with that.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for sharing those perspectives with us. Rudolph, I want to move on to our next question. Maybe we can start with you next, which is, can you share a real world example of mobile app vulnerabilities that you've come across, that you're dealing with, or however you want to pose the question?
Yeah, well, I certainly at USDA here, we are really good about having administrative lockdowns on our tablets, our cell phones, and our laptops, because there are a lot of folks out in the field who use these devices, a whole host of devices to connect to the networks, to VPNs. And so we have to ensure that there are administrative lockdowns so that we don't get unsecure applications or insecure websites with HTTP. We enforce HTTPS. There are a lot of things that the administrators do in terms of those simple processes, as well as ensuring security is updated and servers are scanned for the mobile functionality. So in that regard, we're a pretty secure agency in terms of Internet of Things. So we rely heavily on those because, as you can imagine, we have inspectors out in the field. I'll give you an example of right now where this big avian flu outbreak has the inspectors are out there on the farms, and they have to be very careful in terms of not only physically being out there and not transmitting germs and so forth, but also using their devices to securely update confidential data and all kinds of data to the data stores within a VPN network. So there really is kind of a limit on what people can do with these internet devices that are not within the firewall. So by nature and because of necessity, we have to ensure those. We don't really encourage people to upload apps. Certainly there are some that are allowed. You're not going to be able to block all these apps, but this customer experience center here, which handles a lot of that management of these devices, does a fairly good job of ensuring security, limits the number of applications we can upload to the platform. And then sometimes you'll come in the morning and you'll see that an application, or for example, in my work, administrative work, I'll be using like secure remote tools to try and get into servers, and the next day I'll look on the desktop and it's gone. So they're continuously scanning, they're continuously monitoring the devices as well as the networks, to ensure security. And because of that, as a result of that, we've got a really good defensive posture when it comes to security and any kind of vulnerabilities. Because in point of fact, USDA provides a lot of secure data in terms of like crop data that's used by Wall Street and Chicago Board of Trade to speculate on. So we have to really ensure a high level of security here. So
yeah,
it's not fancy or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, Mark, let's hear from you next.
So I'm gonna bring up an older example. It's about 10 years old, but it's still very relevant. Not directly from my organization, but within the realm of military operations. There was a very interesting homebrewed application developed by the Ukrainians back in 2014. And I don't know if anybody remembers hearing about this in the news, but the Russians took X Agent, which was originally developed for iOS, ported it over to Android, and was able to infiltrate their artillery targeting information, which resulted in 15 to 20% casualties, actual human death because of lack of security in applications. It's a bit of an extreme example, but we turned around and did our own scans when this came to light. Obviously, this is all unclassified. You can find a really good CrowdStrike report on this if you just Google CrowdStrike and Fancy Bear. And they go into this as well as some information operations stuff the Russians were doing at the time. And but we took that, and then we also implemented some of it during our exercises, and were able to use a Marine posting Instagram and his location data from an artillery battery during WTI in the following year in about 2017. I think there was a news article on that. It wasn't very, secretive. Also, we had some kill switch issues at the time, but because of that, we went and turned around and tightened our security. The Ukrainians have also taken note of what happened back then, and they are much more litigious, and they adhere to a better process now for their ATOs and their application distribution. The way the Russians got in was people were distributing the application via a message board, and it was being side loaded onto these phones, and the Russians injected the attack that way through message board traffic. So security can be about money, and it can be about lives and information.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that example with us. All right, I'm going to call for the first poll question here, which is going to be up on the screen momentarily for our audience. So again, audience at home, this is to receive your CPE credit. Be sure to respond to it. ATARC, make sure to leave it up on the screen long enough for people to read through all of the choices. But the poll question states, how would you best describe the current priority of mobile security within your organization or agency? So please take a moment to review that. And then as for our panelists, we're going to move on now to our third question. Steve, would you want to respond first? My question is going to be regarding the shift from secure by design to secure by demand. What proactive steps do you think organizations can take to help strengthen their mobile app security?
Yeah, and that's I was waiting for 3, 4, and 5, those questions, because they all relate to the cyber survivability efforts that the DoD has been pursuing. Secure by design, secure by demand. It just doesn't happen by by requiring standards, overlays, or best engineering practices. We have got to define performance expectations, and it shouldn't be the J6 or the CISO or CIO that defines those. They're the ones who should be coming up with the solution sets, the options to achieve and sustain what the CFO, CEO, and COO expect in terms of cybersecurity and cyber resilience for that application. And the way to do that is to define it in terms of performance. What are their expectations and as it's related to performance, because then the program manager can be graded on their ability to achieve cost, schedule, and performance that includes cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And we really have not, the DoD's cyber risk, the problems with it has not been due to a lack of cybersecurity strategies, policy, or standards. We've had great standards for decades. Okay, but attempting to just apply those standards in an acquisition has not worked very well. In fact, a study from the Defense Systems Management College identified that 70% of defects will be introduced before coding begins if you're not considering cybersecurity and cyber resilience up front when you are doing an analysis of alternatives of various capabilities and options. And that 80% of defects are not going to be found until 95% of the funding is committed. Now, with DevSecOps and testing earlier, the defects are going to start being found earlier than what was done with this before DevSecOps. But the problem is still going to remain that a large percentage, back then 97% of rework costs were going to be too costly to influence the design, and there'll still be a significant. Hopefully, they'll do another study that after DevSecOps has begun to be implemented effectively across the department. But we really do have to find a way to evolve from that cybersecurity standards compliance focus to one that maintains the importance of those standards, but emphasizes defining foundational threshold performance requirements, expectations that, for our senior leaders for both cybersecurity and cyber resilience that are mission focused, threat informed, and system specific. So if we can get the CEO, the CFO, and the COO to say, here are our 100 performance expectations and against the level of threat that we foresee for this capability. And then we go out and come up with a solution set that says, here are the technologies, the zero trust activities that we want to implement. And with that, we believe we can achieve this much, 70% of the requirements that you've levied. We'll never be able to support all of their requirements, but if we can get them to define their performance expectations up front, we can now tell them what our solution sets are going to be able to achieve. And we've never had that before. We've gone out and said, here are the technologies we want to implement, and it's going to cost $100 million. And they say, well, that's too much money. What can you do for less? And we come back with a solution set, but we can't say what it is that we didn't achieve. We can say what it didn't achieve in terms of the other $100 million one, but we can't tell them how much we're not achieving in terms of their real requirement. And then if it is part of a trade space decision on their part, they can look at that 100 requirements. We're achieving 70 for $50 million, and they can say, that's just not acceptable, or they can either say it's an acceptable risk and we can go forth and build it, or more likely they're going to say, we really have to have 10%, this 10% more here to be minimum viable in the expected operational environment. So, I could spend an hour or more talking about just how to get that buy-in from senior leadership. But I'll listen in and see what others have to say on this.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Chris, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, Steve, it's a great line of thinking here. We've been obviously paying attention to the news about the changes to potential software acquisition process, which will change, how mobile applications and apps from vendors are deployed across the DoD and civilian government. Faster FedRAMP process, fast track on DoD software acquisition of software, etc. And I mean, we see the pain from the other perspective. If you had too many gates, then you're not going to be using up-to-date software or software that enables the workforce or the warfighters to be effective. But on the flip side, of course, you want to make sure that the cybersecurity is top of mind. So I think in reality, as this is shifting, some of the responsibility for secure by design, where previously it was all focused on the vendors, doing their checks, proper documentation, submission of all these documents. Well, the reality is, the government is needing to acquire software faster than all of those vendors can catch up with those requirements. So some of the responsibility for secure by demand is going to shift to the government to ensure that the software that they're procuring is secure. And with that comes use of potential new technology. So instead of relying on the developer or the vendor to provide you all this information, can you use something to generate that information for you so you can do the assessment faster? And we saw this a couple years back, worked with Department of Homeland Security around their NIAP requirement. And that requirement is still in place now for mobile apps that are used on DoD devices, for any managed application on DoD devices. And what we saw in that assessment was, the manual process of getting that certification was simply too expensive and too time consuming. And the pace of change of those applications was outpacing the ability to prove compliance. So you could take 2 months and, $100,000 and test the crap out of an application and prove that it's compliant. But meanwhile, 3 more versions have come out that aren't certified. So how do we, bridge that gap? And I think it is through the use of automation, new AI, machine learning tools that can assess the code packages potentially for the vendor, and they can be potentially a recipient of some of this if they don't have the capabilities themselves. So enable that fast acquisition, but ensure security at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you. George, go ahead.
So the two gentlemen before me mentioned the acquisition process, and that's kind of where the soup wheelhouse is. But part of that is making sure that through that process, as you're working through, or the agency is working through the acquisition process, there's a development of requirements. And in that requirements development, making sure cybersecurity is paramount as part of the demand, making sure the agencies know what the risks are with, whatever software or application they're looking to purchase. So you have to do a proper risk assessment and making sure that if cybersecurity or whatever cybersecurity demands are, paramount for your agency, that those are included as part of the deliverables for your requirements and your whatever software you're purchasing.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I'm going to call for poll question number 2, and then Steve will get right to you. But real quick, poll question number 2, what is your agency's biggest challenge in securing mobile devices? So audience, please take a moment to respond to that. Again, this is for your CPE credit. And then ATARC will post the results up on the screen for anyone that's curious. But yes, Steve, before we move on to our next question, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and going back to the acquisition part, because that's where we really have to improve the way we do business. And that is, standards are not requirements. They are not system requirements. They are organizational requirements that can be used to achieve and sustain an operational requirement. But we have to define the operational requirement up front, and that is the thing that we have completely failed to do over the years. The fast track ATO process, great, but define the performance expectations for, what does, in the threat environment for that capability, how quickly does something have to be detected? How quickly does somebody have to report that to somebody who cares enough and can do something about it? What are the timelines to restoring to a known good condition before there's a mission failure? And then, more importantly, and I think I can't remember who brought it up, and I think it's actually part of question number the evolving threats in 5, and that is, how can we adapt to changes in adversary threat over time? How can we adapt to changes in understanding of the vulnerability risks that we've already accepted but are no longer acceptable? How do we adapt to changes in the use of this capability? It may have only been allowed to be used in certain areas, but now we're planning to use it with all of the mission partners that we've got out there, and that risk is no longer an acceptable risk. So we cannot and we should not be trying to define the objective capability for it. We are not prescient enough. None of us are smart enough to know what 5 years from now the threat is going to be. We understand we should be able to do a pretty good job of the next, 6 months to a year. But even so, that's a minimum viable performance capability that's necessary during that time frame. And but we don't want to over-engineer it. We need to give the developer the flexibility to implement newer technologies that are proven in terms of cybersecurity and cyber resilience to achieve and sustain an operationally relevant risk posture. So I hate to take over all the time. Like I said, I could do another hour on this, but I'll let other people talk and we'll hit it up some more.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that perspective. Okay, so the next question that I want to ask, Mark, if we could start with you, how can IT teams effectively balance mobile app risks with resource constraints?
So I wouldn't say our challenges over here in the Marine Corps are unique, but we definitely do run into a lot of problems down on the distant end. Traditional, garrison in CONUS type architectures and stuff are usually a lot more stable than our deployed users are. And they get up to some mischief sometimes with good intention of trying to make do more with less, as I mentioned earlier. So I think probably one of our biggest challenges is extending trust and training down to the lowest levels. We'll have, the strategic corporals, we like to call it, could be a lance corporal or whatever, lower junior enlisted Marines, making IT decisions on the fly in very tense situations, people trying to develop apps because they see a shortfall. So a lot of times it really for us comes down to very intense user and even, local administrator training and making sure that they're up to date so that they don't, with good intent, shut off something that we missed in order to have more capability that they feel they need, and then open up some sort of security issue that could result in fatality, mission failure, or folks just not performing good cyber hygiene, or they're just bored and they're trying to have access, to stuff they probably shouldn't have while they're deployed or in training environments.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to comment on that? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, this is one of the key areas with the cyber survivability, and that is balancing that resource and mission risk in the development of a capability. Instead of $300 million being used to develop a capability, weapon system, however, whatever it happens to be, let's just say $300 million to develop the capability. $10 million is then applied to achieve your certification and authority to operate. So all cybersecurity and cyber resilience, ensuring the standards and best engineering practices are competing for that $10 million risk trade space because they aren't performance. When you define them as performance, now cybersecurity and cyber resilience can be balanced with all of the functionality of that capability. Because if you don't balance cybersecurity and cyber resilience with the functionality, you can get the greatest capability and there be no reasoned expectations it'll be survivable in the intended operational environment. So finding a way to define cybersecurity and cyber resilience in plain language, mission-focused, threat-informed, and system-specific requirements that our CEO, CFO, COO can understand sufficiently to be able to justify and support the level of cybersecurity and cyber resilience engineering and standards required is absolutely paramount. We cannot go and say we need two-factor authentication, ICAM, and a whole list of cybersecurity technical capabilities. We've got to be able to say, do you really want to only have authorized, people, processes, and applications to be able to access the data here? Put it in their language. And that's what we've done with the 10 cyber survivability attributes. We have exemplar language that is language that they understand sufficiently, but a CISO, CIO, and system security engineer also understand sufficiently to be able to decompose that requirement into specific engineering requirements for the capability. So the only way to balance things is if we in fact define them as performance expectations for the capability.
Thank you. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So wanted to talk about kind of two angles to this on resources. So one, of course, is people, and the other is money, cost for risks in this area. So for mobile apps specifically, we've worked with a lot of different agencies in the civilian and DoD government, and I see kind of two main themes. One, if you're not aware, a lot of agencies do have dedicated staff to reviewing app risks. App vetting is typically called for mobile. So we work with a lot of these agencies that have this staff, and for them, it's all about how many can I look at in one day. I've got to do some manual inspection. It might take me a few days, might take me a week. So what we work with them is, how do we automate some of their process so that they're the ones making the decisions, which is ultimately what they want to do. Should I allow this or should I not? To get them the information they need to make that decision in as fast as possible time. So with one agency specifically, they had 3 staff dedicated to doing this application review, application vetting work. With the application of automation, that I mentioned, we were able to get that down to less than 1 person. So they were able to fulfill the same throughput with 1/10 of 1 person's time, rather than 3 full dedicated people. So that's resources that are obviously freed up for use in other areas where they can be more efficient, and they're doing the work that they actually need to do, which is making the decision on the risk rather than trying to discover the risk necessarily themselves with their own time. So that's one angle on the people side, but of course there's the licensing, tooling side as well, So a lot of these agencies are also struggling with, especially today, it's no secret, efficiency is top of mind across everywhere in the government. What types of tools do I have that potentially overlap with each other in the mobile space? Do I have something that comes with something like my Microsoft suite, which, provides a service, but I'm not utilizing it yet, and I'm paying for something else on top of that. So one effort that's ongoing in a lot of agencies today is looking at that tooling, those overlaps, and trying to find how do we make the most efficient solution um, by choosing, the tooling infrastructure that doesn't overlap with each other. So at Quokka, we're working with some of these providers to align, all these types of app risk detection solutions with the infrastructure to enable them to be more efficient, enable them to, fully utilize the licenses, the tools that they're already paying for, and potentially get rid of overlapping tools as part of that to gain that license efficiency as well.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I'm going to call for our third poll question. So again, for our audience, third poll question is up on the screen. How is your organization protecting against mobile app threats on employee devices? Please take a moment to respond to that. And we are going to quickly cover our final question in the Q&A section before we do our round of takeaways. Rudolph, would you like to start us off with this one, which is just what emerging trends in mobile app security do you think organizations should be aware of, and how can they help better stay ahead of evolving threats?
Sure. So I'd like to state that with regard to our customer experience center, as I mentioned earlier, we are constantly being vigilant about understanding what the threat vectors are, what technologies are out there to prevent them. We're introducing new scanning tools on like a weekly basis. We just brought another one in. So that's an important thing to do, is to stay on top of it, get the latest technologies. And one thing I really like about USDA is they are not afraid to bring in vendors with the latest technologies, and a good cost proposition. So I'm impressed about that, because I come from private industry where we are always trying to stay cutting edge to stay ahead of the competition. USDA employees or in the CIO shop are utilizing that and trying to rely and collaborate with these vendors to provide the latest technologies. Like I won't name any names, but some of the security scanning tools that we're using today, as well as the edge protection tools. I think Landon had mentioned one of them, a large one earlier on the call. So we're trying to maintain that threat vector protection, continuous device monitoring as well. So from that standpoint, we don't really have a lot of issues with people introducing applications that are not vetted or that are not fully secure or ATO'd or whatever. So from that standpoint, we're pretty good on our platforms, because as I mentioned, we got a heck of a large presence out in the field with our inspectors and our state offices that utilize different platforms to VPN on in or to access the systems. So they have to be secure. As far as any application development is going, we mostly utilize third-party softwares, the CRM tools, the geospatial tools. I'll name Esri as one. That they are on top of the security as well. They collaborate with us to ensure that the latest and greatest trends and best practices are being introduced in terms of not only the functionality but security. So there's a really good attempt to stay on top of that, stay ahead of the curve, because I'll tell you, the security issues just never go away. They're changing from day to day, as you can see. With Microsoft recently had that big breach, as did Amazon. Now, Another thing we do is we use some of the hosting, private cloud, hybrid cloud hosting facilities for our mobile apps and our servers. So we rely a lot on those too. Now, that's not to say Amazon or Microsoft is infallible, but we do rely on them to provide the security level that we demand. So
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
So I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. And again, Rudolph had a lot of great points. Not in any way saying anything negative about that approach. And I do see it a lot, and it has a lot of utility. I would say there's been, at least in my arena, and I've seen throughout, and this is my personal opinion, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Marine Corps at the moment. I've seen a lot of, I won't want to say complacency, but extended trust with a lot of vendors. And even some of the biggest names where people are like, oh, they're so secure, let's just fast track this. And we've found, even with our limited capabilities and skills, we've found holes in some of the biggest vendors. I'm not going to name any names. Some of this stuff is over the past 10 years or so of experience. But I would say that there still needs to be there's what I like to call an insider outsider threat, because they have, especially with the cloud offerings and cloud hostings, you have people outside your organization with inside permissions. And it's been shown multiple times that not necessarily you might have the senior levels of that corporate organization that are very supportive and on board with you, but then elements of their staff have very publicly said, especially with the DoD, we don't support what you're doing. And where does that potential risk, where does that come in, where somebody who has those elevated permissions because we're using cloud hosted services or things like that nature, there's an additional level of trust we're extending to folks that are technically outsiders that have insider permissions, as well as just saying, oh, this platform, we're so used to this platform, they have the best security in the world, right? And then we'll find holes in it, on the IT level, or something that may be very user friendly is not administratively secure. It's, and they're like, well, this is my favorite widget, but those of us that have to work with it from a technical perspective are like, yeah, it's an IT nightmare though. So just being mindful of those different layers of having to have trust and actually still, trust, but verify, which, Rudolph did mention too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your perspectives. Okay, well, I want to make sure that we each have adequate time for sharing key takeaways. So from this conversation, we're coming up on our hour here. What is just one key takeaway that you have gathered from this conversation that you really want to resonate with our audience before we close out the conversation today? Landon, if we could start with you and then we'll go around, please.
Sure, yeah, I would say that one takeaway that I would want people to do, make sure that they differentiate between the operating systems that are commonly in use today and maybe secure privacy-based operating systems for phones like Graphene or Calyx or EOS or Lineage OS or IOA Day. There are all these other versions of operating system that can be made more than just the traditional iPhone and Android phone. And so I would say take a look at stuff like that if you need security, because those operations like Graphene OS allow you to create profiles to isolate applications in profiles so there can be no cross contamination of your contacts being snaked out by some application that somebody installed, right? So I would say that capability in Android operating systems of doing profiles and having certain applications be in their own profile so that isolated is a functionality that I think a lot of organizations don't know exist. And I would like people to take that as a takeaway, to look at something like a Graphene OS running on Android profiles to isolate applications so that they can run their secure apps in a secure way, and maybe utilize operating systems that are not just iPhones or typical Samsung Androids, right? Graphene OS requires that you run it on a Pixel phone, a Google Pixel, and it's a Googled operating system. They've actually moved all the phone home components back to Google. So it's an interesting thing. It's called Graphene OS. I would tell people to look into something like that for their organizations if they have mobile device needs are privacy focused. Like in the we have probation officers that do a lot of work in the field with mobile devices. So that would be an example of something where a privacy distribution would be great, right? If you have very sensitive data that you want to make sure it does not get compromised. So that would be my take for folks.
Thank you, Landon. Okay, let's go to George next.
All right, thanks, and thanks for having me this afternoon. I think the one takeaway for the audience today is know what data the apps are accessing and how your users are granting permissions to those apps to access that data. I think that's a key takeaway. You know, I know a lot of these apps are managed by the agencies, mobile device management and deploying the applications. And so typically, they already set up the restrictions to prevent, data from accessing or the apps from accessing data they don't need. But make sure, your users know what information they're putting into the system, into the applications, and what data is being shared and how it's being collected.
Thank you, George. Steve, let's go to you next, please.
Okay, what I would want people to leave this conversation with is really have to fight for feedback. Even if the requirements have been delegated to you to implement the best cybersecurity program known to man, at least attempt to get the senior leaders, CEO, COO, CFO, our commanders, J8, J3, in the room and share with them some plain language examples of what they may want in terms of cybersecurity and cyber resilience performance. Do that first. I jokingly say, this is kind of like the lieutenant who's been trained up, really knows their job for attacking a hill. And the general tells them, go attack the hill, and they run off to attack the hill before they find out what hill, what resources, what timing, what support capabilities are they going to get to achieve their goal. So we really need to do that first before we run off and come up with a technical solution that's only going to be really good for this year anyway. Get them to say what their performance expectations are. We've got multiple acquisition pathways. All of them have a defining of performance expectations. What are the performance requirements, no matter what acquisition pathway? If we don't, during the assessment of alternatives, have some requests for information, so for that analysis of alternatives to come up with a rough order of magnitude of the resource and mission risk implications, it'll be very hard. We will just pick something that does the functionality and expect somebody to ensure that the standards and best engineering practices are implemented. And then lastly, after the analysis of alternatives helps us to identify the technologies and capabilities, then we actually tailor the expectations a little bit better and with the RFP to prevent the pursuit of inherently flawed capabilities that there's no reasoned expectation that we could cost effectively mitigate, much less remediate the known risks. So fight for feedback. Do that first. Don't go running off to come up with the technical solution. Make sure that whatever technical solution you identify you can map that to the senior leaders' performance expectations. And then it's hard for them to say, well, we don't need that. Well, you already told us you did. So now you may choose to not do it in your risk trade space decision, but that's something that's on them to do. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's go to Rudolph next.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what Steve stated. That's really good points. I'll also say that testing is really important. We developed some applications here for the farmers out in the field to upload data, and we did some pilots with those, and once they went live, we made sure that the security posture was high, and that all of the strictures were in place to ensure the secure transmission of sometimes highly sensitive data. So testing was very important. We went through some rigorous testing for the apps, and then of course working with the solutions provider, some of the CRM providers that helped us develop the tools to upload the data was key. So yeah, it's kind of like a collaborative effort. I think you need to stay collaborative, and like Mark had stated, don't rely on the vendor alone to ensure that he's gonna, or he or she is going to provide a totally end-to-end secure solution. So collaboration and testing.
Thank you. Okay, Mark, we'll go to you next.
Okay. Yep. Definitely need to make sure we keep testing everything. Never discount your users' ability to come up with new and unique ways to break your stuff. But leverage that. I try not, like, if somebody comes to me with something, because I wear that cybersecurity hat. I don't punish people if they're coming to me with good information that they broke something. I want them to be able to have that route to tell me, have that mechanism and avenue for your users to be like, hey, I found this hole. We probably need to address it. Make sure they can be your best/worst pen testers. Don't discount your user base to figure out something you didn't.
Thank you, Mark. And then Chris, we'll end with you.
Sure. So one topic we didn't talk about too much today was is China. There's a lot of focus on Chinese hardware in our networks, from manufacturers like Huawei, others that are trying to get around restrictions by, creating, subcontractors or sub organizations. But at the same time, there's been a lack of focus on the software. So I mentioned an example earlier about one of the most popular Apple App Store apps. It's a utility app, not a social app, that's sending all files, things that it has access to, that the user's granted access to, directly back to China. And this is pervasive across almost every customer in the federal government that we've worked with. They're finding hidden connections that weren't obvious, or data being shared directly, even if they've built the biggest walls and the toughest walls on their device so data can't cross over. Well, it turns out even some of the US government's own developed apps are sharing data there through the software supply chain. So I think those same attention that we give to the network layer, and ensuring that those providers aren't operating on our network, we need to give to the software. And of course, we're focused on apps here, so we see that a ton. And I think generally as a country, there hasn't been as much focus. So I think raising the heightened attention there, and enabling us to protect ourselves better.
Great. Well, thank you all for your takeaways. We have one final poll question for our audience that'll be up on the screen here momentarily, but it just asks if you'd like to receive your CPE credit. So be sure to respond to that. And then to wrap things up, I just want to thank our panelists for all of your insights, your time being here today, and as well as our participants at home who are viewing it. We appreciate you attending, and of course, Quokka for making today's event possible. They've been our sponsors, and we really appreciate them. So if you enjoyed this content, you'll probably like our next webinar. We have them every Thursday at the same time. So next time is May 20th. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Farbid Kaushnid, and it is on bridging quantum technologies with autonomous systems. So please go register for that one on our website, just like you did for this one, and we hope to see you there.